Miami's looking like one of the best teams in the country thus far early this season. They survived a close one against Notre Dame at home and then beat a pretty capable USF squad before steamrolling a UF team that's kind of lost their footing. Now, last year, Miami had a pretty decent team as well, although that was anchored by an elite offense that was backed up by a pretty miserable defense. The flip has kind of switched, and while this offense is no longer elite, they have lost Cam Ward, who I think was an elite college quarterback at least, and replaced him with a capable and stable Carson Beck. But what's really changed for them is that their defense went from a unit that didn't tackle well and whose safeties and corners were unreliable at best to an elite defense. Arguably the second best defense in the country behind what's looking to be an exceptional Ohio State defense. So let's jump into the film. Let's see how they do it and see if there's any places that a team could exploit if they wanted to steal one against the Hurricanes. Let's start talking about their offense by talking about their run game. Now, they base out of what's called duo, which emphasizes double teams across the line. And really what they're trying to do is they're trying to major in success rate. So success rate is a measure of how successful you are on a play-to-play basis. They're not a huge offense in terms of getting explosives, but you can pretty much guarantee that they're going to get 2 to 3 yards on every play. Now, they bring in a lot of bunch sets, bring in extra tight ends, and really lean on you using their offensive line and wear you out throughout the course of a game. You'll see a lot of their plays look just like this, where there's just kind of a pile of mush along the offensive line, no free runners through, and they just kind of push you forward 2 to 3 yards. They use these bigger running backs to try to make sure they're always falling forwards. They don't run a ton of RPOs off of this, but when they do, they're typically just screens out wide. If they just feel like they can dominate you on the perimeter or dominate you in the run game, they won't feel the need of throwing the ball downfield. Occasionally, they will pull guards or even tight ends, but when they do this, it plays a lot like duo. Pretty much 70% of their run plays, whether it's duo or inside zone, really doesn't change much. They're really trying to lean on you and wear you out by the end of the game. Against Florida, you saw a lot more true zone, so split zone, outside zone. You can kind of tell that this is different from their duo game because the offensive linemen are taking bucket steps, taking these steps sideways, trying to race defenders out to the side. When they run a lot of this, you have to watch out because in that split zone where the tight end is pulling across the line of scrimmage every play, they will release him out into the flats and just dump it off to him. They got a couple of big plays against Florida off of this. One set that I saw pretty consistently, they ran it in several different games, is this two-back set. So out of this two-back set, you're going to see them run almost exclusively a motion RPO where they motion one of the running backs out to the flats and they read an outside linebacker. If he stays outside, they give it up the middle with numbers in the run game. If he stays inside, they throw it out to the flats, and they really do trust their wide receivers and tight ends on the perimeter to make those blocks. In addition, if they're going to run any sort of screens, more likely than not, what you're going to see are tunnel screens. So this is where a receiver or a tight end works their way back into the middle of the field. And you can really tell that they trust their offensive line. They want to make their offensive line the feature star of their offense. So even their screen game, more often than not, is working back towards that offensive line, allowing them to really be people movers and ensuring that they're always moving the ball forward. Their running game isn't terribly exciting. They're not going to do anything that blows your mind. Although I did see a little bit of variety in that Florida game with that outside zone and the occasional buck sweep. Really, when they need to move the ball in chunks, they're going to turn to their passing game. Now, the first passing concept I want to touch on is one that builds off of something we talked about earlier. Miami loves bunch sets. You're going to see them put wide receivers in these little bunches all the time. And really the primary passing concepts they run out of that is this kind of option concept is what I'll call it. But basically every time you'll see one clear out by the outside receiver, the inside receiver is going to run some sort of wheel or fade, and that just kind of clears out space for the wide receiver that gets left behind to run what I believe is an option route, where he has multiple different choices. You'll see sometimes he runs an in, sometimes he runs a go, he might even run an out. But essentially, these other routes are acting as clear outs for that option. They will throw it to the crosser or the fade if they're open or if they feel like they've got man coverage in a good matchup. But it does seem more often than not they're trying to set up a play for that middle wide receiver to get open. Now, their second most called passing concept was mesh. So in mesh, you've got two receivers that cross right over the line of scrimmage. Mesh is just a play that works pretty well against everything if you get the time at the line of scrimmage. And we saw last year where Virginia was able to really take advantage of Florida State's defensive backs using mesh when they saw man coverage. Miami has an interesting twist on mesh where they run what I'll call mesh return, where essentially it looks like it's mesh, but those receivers will pivot and run the opposite direction. So if they see that corners or safeties are biting hard trying to chase the mesh, they can get a pretty free release on the outside, which is a much safer throw for the quarterback. When they're not running one of these three concepts, you'll almost always see them run this kind of dig under concept, usually to the back side of the field. So a dig is this 10 and in route, or sometimes it kind of looks more like a post. And then the under route could be anything. It could be, a twirl route like we've seen, or it could just be a hitch or an in route. But essentially all they're trying to do is occupy those outside linebackers to try to get that dig opened up behind him to get an easy completion about 10 yards downfield in the intermediate area. If the under route is open, the quarterback will hit it early just to take the free yards. What's kind of interesting is mesh return features a dig under concept, usually to the backside, where that kind of twirl route acts as the under route and there's a dig over top of it. So you kind of get the same read for the quarterback, whether or not it's presented as a true mesh return or a dig under. Now, usually what they pair that dig under route with is some kind of high-low concept. And the reason why I've got this blocked out instead of explicit routes drawn is because it really doesn't matter who's running the high and who's running the low. The idea is the same. I have a feeling that their offense isn't necessarily based upon explicit routes, like a wide receiver runs a post or a wide receiver runs a dig, but more of they've got an area, they've got a place they've got to get to, and depending on where they line up on the field to start with determines what route they have to use to get to that spot. So you'll see this high-low look different in different ways. You can either see a true slot fade where this slot receiver runs a fade as the high, and then you've got hitches or outs underneath it. You see a true stick where there's an inside hitch and outside fades. You see a corner route by the inside receiver instead of a fade to get to that deep route and then hitches underneath it. But no matter how you slice it, whether it's a snag concept, a stick concept, a slot fade concept, you're really getting those receivers hitting the same place. One of them's hitting high, one of them's hitting low, and usually you have one that's kind of towards the middle of the field that's also low to create kind of a triangle read. Kind of a deviation you might see off one of these stick concepts is a deep stick concept where the receivers release like they're going to run vertical for about 15 yards and then work their way down back towards the quarterback away from any defenders. This is actually a fairly common comeback route you'll see throughout their playbook, where wide receivers do a really good job of working back to the quarterback and separating themselves on these comeback routes. Now, when they need to push the ball downfield a little bit, they'll turn to a cross concept, which is usually opposite of that dig under concept I was just talking about. And in the cross concept, you have one receiver running a deep cross or post, and then another receiver kind of following them and kind of hitching underneath them. These concepts comprise a vast majority of Miami's passing game. I don't think the passing game is really what they want to lean on. They don't want to be in a ton of situations where they have to throw the ball downfield because they want to be able to rely on their run game. One other interesting thing that I came across is that some of these passing concepts follow their formations pretty closely. Like, I noticed that mesh and mesh return are almost never called out of the same formation. Mesh, throughout 3 different games that I charted, was ran out of a 3x1 set 5 separate times, and I didn't see it run out of any other set. Mesh return, on the other hand, I saw 6 times, and 5 of those times was out of a 2x2 set, so it didn't match what we saw out of mesh. However, there was a single time when I saw 3 wide receivers on one side and 1 wide receiver on the other, and they ran mesh return. So I do think it exists in the playbook, but If there's any place that they could be exploited, it's that I think that their formations can kind of be a giveaway to what kind of passing concept they might run. A little bit more evidence to that is that this cross concept that I've got drawn here was picked off twice in 2 different games. I think that if defenses see a certain formation and see multiple receivers releasing downfield, they can kind of guess what's coming at them. However, Miami's bread and butter is not their offense this year, despite last year's tremendous success. I still think this is probably a top 20 offense and not an offense that's going to have trouble scoring against almost anybody in the country because their offensive line is that solid. Where this team has really come into its own is on defense. Now, I'm going to talk a second about their scheme. They're a cover 3 team mostly. They do mix in some man free. You'll see them mix some even fronts and some odd fronts. They do some games up there, but really what I want to pay attention to, and where I think you should pay attention to, is not necessarily their scheme, because I don't think that's what makes them special. What makes them special is that they're very aggressive. Their safeties, even when they're playing cover 3, where this safety has deep thirds, will come up hard into the box to stop any sort of run game and be very aggressive down towards the run. On top of their safeties being aggressive, they love blitzing, and they have a dominant defensive line. This defensive line can get pressure, blitz or not. They really help disrupt the rhythm of offenses. Consistently, when you watch their games against teams, it feels like offenses have trouble getting anything going because the quarterbacks have guys in their face within seconds, and the run game can never really get going to allow people to get comfortable. I do think that if you want to score on this defense, the key is to use a lot of misdirection, get the quarterback involved in the run game like Notre Dame did, and hope that you can get some screens and other things to kind of loosen up this pressure and take that defensive line out of the picture. This Miami team is good. They're number 2 in the country right now, and I don't think there's anybody that would disagree that they're clearly a top 5 team. This defense is truly looking to be elite early on in the season, and if they can keep it up, they're going to be someone that you have to watch come playoff time. Now, I do think Florida State has some advantages. Florida State's offense has proven to be very successful over the course of the year. They've got a mobile quarterback that can offer some real difficulties to even great defenses. I do think home field advantage matters. You saw it against Alabama and then again against Virginia, where teams just have a little bit of trouble adjusting on the road. This will be Miami's first road game. You have to factor that in a little bit when you're talking about this game. Miami, I do think, is the better team. However, if Florida State can get a little bit going, if a few bounces can go their way, you will hopefully be looking at a great game this Saturday in Tallahassee. Thanks for watching. I really enjoyed doing this one. Miami's a really good team this year, and I do think there's a chance that this rivalry game gives us something, but there's an equal chance that Miami kind of controls the game throughout the whole course and Florida State can never quite get into it. If you're a Florida State fan, please like and subscribe. If you're a Miami fan, please show this to your friends. Give a comment. How did I do? What did I miss? Hopefully I taught you something schematically about your team, and I'd love to hear more about your team in the comments below. So thanks.